So, welcome to A Sting in the Tail YouTube channel. You've got your calendar and you'll know that this month's story is Loki and the Wall, illustrated by the wonderful Glenn. Little advert. You can come and see live storytelling on the third Wednesday of every month. And our next Wednesday in March is the fabulous Hugh Lopton. So have a look for A Sting in the Tail on all the social media outlets that you follow and come and join us. Today's story. Thor was on holiday. He was off to battle with some trolls, which he'd like to do on his holiday. And Odin looked around and he said to himself, what we need is some protection when Thor is away. Can't rely on him every time. What we need is a wall. And Loki, who was standing close by, said yes. But to build such a wall, it would take years and years and years to make it tall enough to prevent a giant scaling it, and strong enough that even the bull-headed troll couldn't break his way through. And Odin said, yes, you're right, but it is a wall we need. And the very next day, a stranger appeared, coming across the meadow from the forest, with a giant grey stallion following. And he went to Odin and he said, I hear that you have need of a wall. I can build a wall. I can make it so tall that not even the biggest giant could climb over, and so thick that not even a troll could batter their way through. And I could lay one slab on top of the other so finely cut that not even an ant could go through the wall. And Odin said, well, news travels fast. We need definitely a wall, but what would it cost? And the stranger said, just 3 little things. The first is that I would want the hand in marriage of the beautiful Freya. And Odin said, that's not such a little thing. And she might have something to say about that. And what else? And the stranger said, I want the sun from the sky, the moon from the night sky, and the hand of Freya. And Odin said, okay, if you just want to wait outside for a bit, we'll have a discussion. And so the stranger left, but not before he'd asked where he could get food and water for his horse. And Odin said to the gathering of gods and goddesses, so what do you think? And they said, no, that price is far too high. We couldn't lose Freya, let alone the sun and the moon. The discussion went round and Odin said, okay, so you've decided. I'll call him back in and tell him the answer is no. There was a cough and everybody turned round and there was Loki. And Loki said, well, I think you've missed the point of all this. We will set him an impossible task. We'll say that he has to do it within 6 months. And we'll tell him that he can't have any help. Impossible job. We'll have at least the foundations of our wall that we can build on, and we lose nothing. And all the gods nodded and said, you're a clever man, Loki. But all the goddesses weren't so keen. But the stranger was invited back in, and Odin said, you can build the wall and have your prize on 3 conditions. 1, it must be completed in 6 months' time. And 2, you can have no help to build the wall. You must do it yourself. And 3, There must be no magic or spells. It must be your physical work. And the stranger looked into the distance and he thought, and he said, 6 months, yes, it's doable. But when you can say I can have no help, surely it's not unreasonable to ask for my horse to help. And Odin said, so you'll build a wall to the conditions that we set out, and it'll be you and the horse, and it'll be done in 6 months' time. In that case, we have a deal. And they shook hands, and then they swore binding oaths on Odin's ring and on Odin's sword, binding oaths that could not be broken. And they watched as from out of the forest, the stranger dragged a huge sledge, massive it was. And he took tools from the sledge, and whilst they watched, began to dig. And he dug a trench all the way round Asgard. And the gods said to each other, he digs well, and he digs fast. And Loki said, yes, but don't worry. He'll only make it better for us with such deep foundations. And when the stranger dug this foundation trench all the way round Asgard, he took the sledge, he turned it round, he attached it with a harness to his horse, and he set off for the mountains and said, I'll fetch the first of the building materials. And off he went. And as he went, the sledge was so heavy, even though it was empty, it gouged a path. And the god and the goddesses did what they usually did. In the evening, they had food, they had drink, they corralled. And Loki said, taking about a week to bring the first slabs of stone back. About midnight, they retired. A few hours later, there was a sound, and they all got up and they looked, and there came that huge horse dragging the sledge. And on that sledge were 20 slabs of granite, each taller than a man. And when they arrived, smiling, the stranger manhandled those huge blocks and filled the trench. And they were quite shocked at this. But Loki said, well, it's the first day, the horse will tire. And when winter comes and the snow is on the ground, everything will be slowed down. Don't worry, you'll never finish on time. And when all those first stones were laid, he took the empty sledge, re-harnessed the horse, and they set off again for the mountains. Every day, he would come back with a sled laden with 20 blocks of granite. And when the snow came and it was thick on the ground, it didn't slow the horse or the man down in the slightest. And day by day, the walls grew and grew and grew. And they began to think that the impossible task might not be so impossible at all. But Loki said, look, no, when the snows melt, there will be so much mud. That horse will not be able to get through it. And the snows disappeared. And they were replaced by plants and flowers of yellow and blue and red. And the mud was thick, but it didn't slow down that horse at all. It came to the last day. 6 months had almost passed. There was one day to go. And they looked and they realized that 20 more granite slabs will complete the wall. And so the gods had counsel, and Odin said, it's clear that he's going to finish the war before the 6 months is up, and we will lose Freya. We lose the sun, we lose the moon. And it's clear also that he is no ordinary man. He's a giant in disguise. No ordinary man could do what he's done. What are we going to do? We can't break our unbreakable oaths. And Freya said, if I am to marry to this giant, I ask for one thing and one thing only before I leave. And Odin said, oh, what's that? And she said, I want the death of the idiot that brought this whole thing together. And Loki said, well, it's difficult to kind of determine one person who did this. I mean, my recollection is that it was a kind of joint proposal and decision. And Freya said, shut up, Odin. I want to promise that he will die before I leave. And Odin said, it shall be so. And Loki said, well, what do you expect me to do? I can't break the oaths. I can't take on a giant by myself. I can't take on a giant. Right, leave it to me. And as he said, this storm was breaking, and the stranger whistled for his horse, his great grey stallion. And he thought to himself, one more day of work, the war will be complete, and I will have Freya, and I will have the sun, and I will have the moon, and the world will be left in perpetual darkness. But I mustn't be carried away, I must do the work first. And he whistled again, which was odd, because he never had to whistle twice for his horse. And he looked, and there was his horse shaking his head, sniffing the air. And so he clapped, and the stallion looked up. He started to move towards him. And he smiled and said, soon everything will be mine. But he got about halfway when this beautiful brown mare appeared. He could tell that it was a mare. Didn't even have to look between her legs. She was sleek. She was feminine as possibly a horse could be. And the stallion stopped, turned towards her. And she ignored him. She bent down and started to eat the grass. But when the stallion got about 12 feet from her, she started to run. And the stallion followed. And no matter what the man said, it had no effect. And in desperation, he watched the two of them disappear into the forest. And he stood and he waited for his horse to come back. And he saw the sun rising in the sky. And so with a howl of pain, he took the reins of that great sled in his own hands, and he slowly began to move it towards the mountains. There were a couple of hours left before midnight when he reappeared, dragging that huge sleigh, but with only 10 granite slabs on it. That was all he could drag by himself. And the gods and the goddesses laughed at him and mocked him and said, where are you going to find the rest of the stones to finish the wall in the next hour or so? And before them, he grew 10 feet, 30 feet, 50 feet high, revealing himself as a giant. And he said, you have tricked me, you have cheated me, and you made binding oaths which you have broken. And Odin said, no, we haven't broken any of our oaths. It's you that cheated us. If we'd have known you were a giant, we'd have never hired you in the first place. And the giant roared, and he picked up 2 of those huge slabs and slammed them together. And with the remnants in each hand, he walked towards them. And Odin and the gods and the goddesses parted to reveal their Thor with his giant hammer. And he swung it around and around and around, and he let it go. And it came towards the giant. And it seemed to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it hit him. And the giant was no more. And Odin and the rest finished the war. It took them months just to find those and hew those last 10 giant slabs. And they were by no means as perfect as the ones that the giant had laid, but the war was finished. And Loki was nowhere to be found. He didn't see this completion. And he was away for almost a year. And then he came back. And as he came from the forest across that meadow, a young foal snickered around him, going like that against his neck. It was almost as though Loki was its mother, which of course she was. And that foal grew into a beautiful horse, the fastest horse the world had ever seen, because it had 8 legs, not the normal 4. And Loki gifted it to Odin. And if one thing was sure, was nobody dared ask where Loki had got his horse from. That's the story of Loki and the war. So thank you for listening. Sorry it was such a long one, but I hope you enjoyed. And next month will be Iris. So, thank you.